Hey, my name is Jan. Today I'll introduce you to the global state React library called Zustand, which you can use instead of the native filled-in React context API, which still requires you to pass props back and forth between components. With Zustand, you create one global store, and in that store you can create methods, for example, to update that store, and those methods can then be used inside of every single component without any props at all. I would say without further ado, let's just get started. And so for demonstration purposes, I am just going to install a new Beat application. Obviously, you can just use Zustand with your Next.js application. That's what I do in a lot of my projects as well. But a complete Next.js app would be completely unnecessary for the sake of this tutorial. So let's just say my React.js app, and then we choose the template of React TypeScript. There we go. Let's cd into that directory, and then let's first run bun install. Perfect. And now let's open up the project inside of our code editor. And I'm also just going to install Tailwind real quick. In order to do that, I'm just following the official Tailwind documentation with Vue.js. So let's run all the necessary commands. We need to use bunx, and as you can see, Tailwind is working correctly because the text turned green. Perfect. So let's get started with Zustand. For that, let's first of all install the package. Now that the package has been installed, let's create a folder inside of our source directory, and let's call that one stores. So for the naming directive, let's call the store, for example, userstore.ts, and here we want to first of all import create from Zustand, just like so. Now we can use the create method, but let's first of all define some types. Let's first of all define the user. Let's say the user has an ID, a name, and maybe an email, just like so. And then let's also define a type for our user store. We'll get to that in a second. And that user store is going to have a user, which is actually going to contain this object, or it can also be null. And let's, for example, create a function called setUser, in which we're just going to pass a user object or null. And so now that we have the types, we can start by creating our store. And so to do that, we are going to export a new const user store. So with all your stores, you always want to use this use in front of it. That's just the naming directive that pretty much everyone uses, and which makes stuff a lot more readable. And now we're just finally using that imported create method from Zustand, and we are going to create a user store of type user store. So we have to define it like that. And so then we want to pass a setter. And in that setter, we want to return a new object, and that object is going to be user. And then obviously the set user function, which is going to take in a user and is then gonna set that user to user. So that function pretty much is going to replace this user, which is going to be the initial state of null because the user doesn't exist. Now let me quickly build a little demonstration UI. I just quickly created this little test UI. Now let me actually show you how you can obtain the store from this file, from the global state pretty much. So in order to do that, all we need to do is just destructure it from the, we want to destructure the user object, or in case the undefined user, from a user store. So in order to do that, we just want to say const user. So we're just destructuring it, and then we want to say use user store, just like this. And that's all. Crazy, right? Now we can just essentially just say JSON. Whoops, let me put that in curly brackets. We can essentially just say JSON stringify and then user, and then we get null, obviously, because it is there's no data in it yet. But let's quickly change that. So let us create a const update user function. Actually, for that we actually need to obtain the set user function, and to get that function, you just want to grab it like this again, just like so. Now let's create the handle update user, just like so, and then in here we can literally pass any object, and it's going to be put into this user state variable. Obviously it has to have the right types since we're using TypeScript, and so let's use the set user function, and the AI gave us some good example data which we're just going to use. So let's say we have a button here that says update user. Let's see how that looks like. We get that button. It has no styles, which looks a little bit weird. So let me give it a few styles, say BG black, give it a border. Okay, now as you can see, we have this update user button, and so right now there's nothing attached to that button, but now if we say on click and then handle update user, and if we save this, refresh the app, and if we click update user, we get the data inside of here. As you can see, this is now stored inside of the global state. So you could essentially just create a new component and just grab the user just like this again and output it on your page, or update it in any other component. So this works completely globally, which is just so nice to use in my opinion. And it is so much easier than all the other overcomplicated global state libraries, such as Redux, for example. So I can definitely recommend Zustand to you. Now, sometimes you also want to update your state, like certain fields, not just like setting a default state at all. So in order to do that, I like to create a update function as well, which uses a partial. So I'll just create a update user method. And so in here, you want to, create a partial user, and then you want to create a setter again. function has the current state in it. And so then you can just say user and then state.user. So if we currently, if we get a state passed and we want to pretty much use the old state and attach whatever we get, which allows us to update certain fields on the user object. So let's quickly create a type for that as well. So update user, and then we're going to create a partial user, and then here I'm going to return void, just like so. And now we can just, for example, grab the update user function again from a use user store. Let's, for example, create a new button which we call update email, and that is gonna, here we can just, let me just quickly pass an arrow function, makes things easier. So now let's just run the update user function, and then we can just, for example, say email, and let's make this test@example.com, for example. Now if you refresh the website, we set the user like this. Actually, let's call this set user, let's call this update email. Yes, it's a lot better. So we set the user, and now if we click update email, it gets set to test@example.com and updated that specific field. Now we can obviously pass a name as well, a new name, and our update user function is working just as expected. The partial type pretty much allows us to modify a certain part inside of our user store, in this case the user object. And so let's click this button again, and now as you can see, our name is new name, and that is pretty much it with this tutorial. This is actually the majority of stuff that you need. Obviously you could go a bit more in depth, but this is, personally in my experience, this is enough for the majority of projects. And as I said in the beginning, I can highly recommend you to get a grip on this new library, because especially for complex apps, which requires you to access the same state again and again with inside of multiple components, it makes just so much sense to use this instead of having to deal with the pain of passing props back and forth all the time between multiple components. And so if you learned something new today, I would highly appreciate it if you could like this video. And if you don't want to miss out on any new tutorial, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.